to today's session on Sushruta Samhita Adhyayana. Without any delay, I'd like to call upon Dr. Mulidhar Sharma sir, STM COD, to take over the session. Welcome to you, sir.
Next is about the prameha chikitsidam vyakhyasyaamaha yatha bhagavan dhanantarihi. द्वौ प्रमेहो भवतः सहजो अपथ्यनिमित्तश्च तत्र सहजो मातृपितृपि बीजदोषकृतः अहितः रजः अपथ्यनिमित्तः तयो पूर्वेण उपद्रुतः कृशो वृक्षो अल्पाशी पिपासुः भृशं परिसरणशीलश्च भवति उत्तरेण स्थूलो बहुवाशी स्निग्धः शय्यासनस्वप्नशीलः प्रायेण इति. Now that prameha is of mainly two categories. About the possibility of prameha being considered as diabetes or not, we have discussed the other way. Of course, prameha includes all the varieties of the renal pathologies, but prominent is among them is the diabetes mellitus. And when Sushruta refers to the prameha chikitsa in this context, it's mainly related to the diabetes mellitus like condition, and these are of two types, sahaja and apathinimitta. Sahaja is genetic and apathinimitta which is acquired. That genetic is produced due to the abnormalities of the genes, either of paternal or maternal, and such a patient would be weak, krishaha, low weight, alpashi, his appetite will be lesser and have more thirst and would be preferably more active. Now this is typical of insulin dependent diabetes conditions. So sahaja is mainly insulin dependent condition, and this is absolutely true that there is a genetic predisposition for the insulin dependent condition. Then the other is ahita aharaja apathinimittaha. The sthula is prameha. The patient would be obese and tends to eat more, and he will be lethargic. He will be having lesser exercise, and these are the type 2 type of the diabetes, and this is always due to the lifestyle factors. Most of the times it's a lifestyle factors, but of course there is a genetic predisposition, but the genetic predisposition is triggered by the lifestyle factors, and with the modification of the lifestyle factors it can be reversed. So diabetes mellitus of type 2 or apathinimitta sthula pramehi is better treated with the reversal of the lifestyle factors, whereas the sahaja is considered as asadhya, and hence the management would be tatra krisham annapana pratisamskritabhi kriyabhi chikitseta. In case of krisha prameha, there is no complete cure. You have to manage, and managing the patient with the right proper form of the food and maybe specific treatment protocols. Sthulam apatarpanayuktabhi. In case of the sthula, it's a regulation of the intake of the food and reducing the body weight. Attempting to reduce the body weight would be the approach. Now, in general, all that treatment protocol which is mentioned in this chapter is mainly aimed at the sthula pramehi, the acquired conditions. Now, sarva eva cha pariharehu, for all types of the patients, saviraka, tushodaka, shukta, maireya, sura asava, toya, payaha, taila, dhrita, ikshu vikara, dathi, pistana, yavagu, panakani, gramya, anupadaka, mamsari, chaiti. The food substances which have to be avoided are these typical varieties of the grains, or maybe the alcoholic preparations of different sorts, or oil and ghee like contents, sugars and all that variants of the sugar cane, drugs of the sugar cane, and guru aharas like the pistana, that carbohydrate containing diets, apanaka, etc., and brahma anupadaka mamsa in the non-vegetarian, this would have to be avoided. Now, how to select the food, I will come to that part in the later part. We will be discussing about calorie, glycemic index, and glycemic load. Now, these factors which are mentioned by Sushruta are related to the same factors. Now, I will be discussing those issues at the end of these discussions. So, we will reserve these factors for the end. ततः क्षाली षष्टिक यव गोधूम गोद्रव वृद्धालकान् अनवान् भुञ्जीत. The cereal is like shashtikashali, yava or godhuma, that wheat, etc. They have to be stored for a year and then they have to be consumed, not the fresh one. Now this again, Nama and Namadhanya and Anavadhanya, we have discussed that part earlier also. Namadhanya, the recently produced one would have more caloric substances, whereas the older ones would have less calorigenic. Chanaka adaki kulatta mugga vikalpena. Dicotyledons like Tanaka, Bengal gram, Adaka, etc., Kulatta, etc., they are preferred. Tikta Kashayabhyam, the Shakaganabhyam, Nikumbhi, Ingudi, Sarshapa, Atasi, Tailasithabhyam, Badam Mutrairba, Jangalehi, Mamsai, Apahardam, Medobhi, Anamlehi, Agradeshta. These grains could be processed with the Tikta Kashayas or and like Nikumba, Ingudi, Sarshapa, etc. Or if at all it's a non-vegetarian food, prefer the non-vegetarian food of the Jangala varieties of the animals, particularly those animals which pass lesser urine, like goats, mutton is preferable, and the mutton should be prepared without meda. That's only the red meat has to be used, and without ambla and ghruta, without any sour taste substances added, or no ghee is added. With that kind of a preparation, it has to be treated. तत्र अजितैव प्रमेहेण स्निग्धम् अन्यतमेन तैलेन प्रियंबादिसिद्धेन वा घृतेन वामयेत् प्रगाढं विरेचयेत् च विरेचनात् अनन्तरं सुरसादिकषायेन आस्थापयेत् महौषधभद्रतावमुस्तावापेन मधुसैन्दवयुक्तेन दक्ष्यमानं च निग्रोधादिकषायेन निस्तैलेन. Now, in all prameha, the better form of the prevention is the shodhana, and for the shodhana, either it's the vamana or the virechana. The vamana or the virechana being practiced regularly definitely can prevent all sorts of the prameha. In diabetes mellitus like conditions too, those who are not yet established diabetic, who do not have a complication of the diabetes mellitus, but who have a tendency to have the diabetes with altered glucose tolerance, I have tried many of these patients with virechana, and the virechana has resulted in a steady maintenance of the glucose level and prevention of the complications also. Now, whatever Sushruta has mentioned is almost on the same lines. The preferred lines would be, in the beginning itself, would be vamana, and the vamana should be given with the sneha of priyangvadi taila or priyangvadi ghrita, and or it could be virechana. Virechana again should be prabhuta virechana, very potent virechana. And after the virechana, asthapana also has to be given, and Sarasati Kashayana asthapayati with the Sarasati Kashaya or Shunti, Badradaru, Musta, etc. With that, the Sarasati Kashaya with the Badradaru, Musta, Shunti, Avapa has to be added. If there is a need, you may have Negrozati Kashaya without oil. Tadaha Shuddhadeham Amalakaraseena Haridram Madhusayuktam Payet Tripala Vishala Devadar Musta Kashayam Va Shala Pillaka Mushka Kalkam Akshamatram Madhu Maduram Amalakaraseena Haridrayutam Kutaja Kapitha Rohitaka Bibhitaka Saptaparna Pushpakalkam Va Nimba Aragvada Saptaparnam Murva Kutaja Soma Vriksha Palashanam Va Tatpatra Mula Pala Pushpa Kashayani Jete Panchayogaha Sarvamehanam Apahantaraha Vyakshataha. 5 simple yogas which could be tried after the shodhana are: one is Haridra Amalaka, Nishamalaki, which is now used quite frequently, that kind of drug with the madhu. It should be done given after the shodhana, or the Tripala, etc. The 5 these combinations are mentioned. Any of these combinations could be selected based upon the status of the patient. Then Visheshascha Tatra Udakamehinam Parjatakashayam Payet. In Udakameha, that's the diabetes insipidus like conditions, Parjatakashaya. This also is absolutely true. Though the number of patients are lesser, it could be treated with the Parjatakashaya effectively. Ikshmehinam Vajayanti Kashayam. In the Ikshmeha, Vajayanti Kashaya. Suramehinam Nimba Kashayam. Surameha bad, the patient has aciduria, it is the Nimba Kashaya. Sikata Mehinam Chitraka Kashayam. Those who have crystalluria, Chitraka Kashaya. Shanehi Mehinam Khadira Kashayam. those who have albuminuria with the repeated episodes of frequency, Khalira Kashaya, Lavamehinam, Patha, Aguru Haridra Kashayam, Pistamehinam, that's a prostate phosphaturia, Haridra, Daru Haridra Kashayam, Sandramehinam, Sattaparana Kashaya. Another very frequent condition which we see clinically would be the albuminuria, like nephrotic syndrome, and in such conditions, Saptaparna Kashaya. I have tried it in a good number of patients and it has given excellent results. Shukramehinam, Durva, Shaivala, Plava, Hatha, Karanja, Kaseru Kashayam, Kakubha Chandana Kashayam. In Shukrameha, of course, the controversy, we have discussed that Shukrameha, what is it, and so on. Maybe it could be like the gonorrhea-like conditions. It could be that Durva, Shaivala, etc. Phenamehinam, Trifala, Arabhada, Mridvika, Kashayam. Where the urine is foamy, that's a specific gravity is lower. In such conditions, Trifala, Arabhada, etc. can be given. Madhu, Madhuramiti, with Madhura. Paitikeshu, Nilamehinam, Shalsaradi Kashaya, Ashwatha Kashayam, Payet. Nilamehinam, hemoglobinuria like condition, Shalasaradi Kashaya, Ashwatha Kashaya. Haridra Mehinam, Dajaruksha Kashayam, where the patient has either it could be due to any other sort of the pigments which are presented in the urine, which can result in yellow color, Rajaruksha Kashayam. Amlamehinam, Negrodhari Kashayam. These issues, Amlameha, what is it? That part we have already referred to. Sharamehinam, Triphala Kashayam. Manjista Mehinam, Manjista Chandana Kashayam. Where the patient may have hematuria, Manjista Chandana Kashaya. Shonita, or where there is a frank hematuria, Shonita Mehinam, Guduchi, Tinduka, Tindukasti, Kashmariya, Kharjura Kashayam, Madhumishramva, Atavurdhum, Asadhyeshwapi, Yogani, Apanartham Mukshamaha, Tajata, Sarpir Mehinam, Kusta, Kutaja Pata, Hingu Katu Rohini Kalkam, Guduchi, Chitraka Kashayana Paye. The Madhumeha, as mentioned in Sushade, suggests of renal failure conditions, chronic kidney disease conditions, and in that condition, Kusta, Kutaja Pata, Hingu Kalka with the Guduji Chitra Kashaya is suggested. Vasamehinam Agnimanta Kashayam, where the patient has a lipiduria, is a Agnimanta Kashaya. Kshaudra-mehinam Kadara Kramuka Kashayam, again a very concentrated urine due to the chronic renal failure, is a Kadara Kramuka Kashaya. Hastimehinam Tinduka Kapita Shirisha Palasha Patha Murva Dusparsha Kashayam Madhu Maduram Hastyashwa Shukaram Khara Ustra Astiksharam Jeti. In the Hastimeha, it's the same thing, like where the total quantity of the urine is lesser but the frequency is more. Bekshimana Maudaka Kandraka Patas Dame Vagum Shira Ikshurasa Mathuram Paye. These are the Yapana Dravyas. They are not really curative treatment, they can manage the patient to a certain extent better. Tadlaha Priyangu Ananta Yuthika Padma Trayantika Lauhitika Ambasta Dadima Twak Shalaparani Padmatunga Keshara Dhataki Bakula Shalmari Srivestaka Mocharaseshu Aristan Ayaskriti Rehan Asavamsha Kurvita. Arista Ayaskriti are Reha of these drugs which are mentioned, like Priyanguadi groups of the drugs could be used, or Shringataka Gilodi Bisa Mranala Kasha Kaseruka Madhuka Amrajambu Asana Tinisha Kakubha Katvanga Rodhra Bhallataka Palasha Charmaruksha Girikarnika Shita Shiva Nichula Dadima Ajakarna Harivruksha Radhagana Gopaghunta Vikankateshva Yavana Vikaram Saiveta. Different sorts of the rice preparations with these plants could be used. Yathokta Kashaya Siddham Yavagum Chasmi Payet. Kashaya of these drugs in the form of Yavagu could be given, or Kashayanima Patum. Directly Kashaya could be given. Now, the most important part of the management is the lifestyle management. And lifestyle management could be, if the person has good resources, then Mahadhanam, Ahitaharam, Aushadadveshanam, Ishwaram va. Patha Abhaya Chitraka Pragadam, Analpamakshikam, Anyatam Asavam Payeta, Angara Shurya Upadam Sumam Mathvikam Akhikshanam, Kshaudra Kapitham Maricha Anuvidhanicha Asmihi Panabhujanani Upahareta, Ustra Ashwatara Khara Purisha Turnanicha Asmi Dudya Ashaneshu, Hingu Saindava Yuktehi Ushes Shastra Pescha Ragi भोजयेत् अभिरुद्धार्च अस्मै पानभोजनानि उपहरेत् रसगन्धवन्ति च प्रवृद्धमेहास्तु व्यायाम नियुद्ध क्रीडा गजतुरग रथ पदातिचर्या परिक्रमणानि अस्त्रोपास्त्रे वा सेवेरन्. The most important part of the management would be if the patient is having good resources and he cannot have a rigorous activity of restricting the food, then the patient is to be advised to do the regular exercise, any sort of exercises. It could be regular vyayama, or it could be more these martial arts like niyudha, or games, or traveling on animals or vehicles as such, or simply walking. That's one part. And about the diet has to be given in such a way that the total calorie intake is reduced, and reduce that calorie intake by giving substances which would reduce the total consumption. And the food could be like the asa was prepared with the patapaya chitrakesa, tiktaka shairasa and katu rasa dravyas, madhvika mangar shulya upadamsha. Ghruta heated otherwise is apatya, but ghruta is indicated in case of the prameha management, which is heated, angara shulya upadamsham, which is heated with the angara, that's the red hot carbon, that is given, sorry, honey, not ghruta, honey, sorry, I was honey heated otherwise is apatya, but in case of prameha chikitsa, Sushruta has suggested this as one of the options. Or the patient has to be fed with the feces of camel or horse, or maybe this donkey. Their feces have to be added with the food, and it has to be given. So these are the suggested treatment for those persons who cannot avoid food. So the bulk is given, but the calorie value is reduced. If the person doesn't have the resources, a poor person and who doesn't have caretakers, then adhanastu abandhavah ya padatrana atapatra virahita bhakshakshi gramaikaritravasi muniriva sanyatatma yojanashatam adhikam vagaccheta mahadhano va shamaka niyamara vrittihi amalaka kapitta tinduka ashmandaka palaharo mrigehi sahavoseta tanmutra shakrat bhakshaha sattam manuvrajeti gaha ब्राह्मणो वा शिला उञ्चवृत्तिर्भूत्वा ब्रह्मरथम् उद्धरेत कृषेत् सततम् इतर खनेत् वा कूपं कृषन्तु सततं रक्षेत. Now, to reduce, have that rigorous exercise, Sushruta has suggested certain of the lifestyle modifications based upon the nature of the work or nature of the social responsibilities the persons have. See, those like sannyasis, those who can move around, suggested is that you have to walk yojana shram, 100 yojana, that's around 400 miles. You have to walk every day and should not stay at any one place for more than a night. Every day you have to move on and walk without footwears or maybe the umbrella, and you have to live a life like the rishis with all regulation, so that the total intake of the food is reduced and you will have more rigorous exercise. Or it could be like you may have to consume the food with the only shamaka niyamara vritti. Shamaka niyamara, these are all the millets types of the food, or amalaka kapitta etc., those which do not really produce a load on the body, and you have to live with the animals and consume their urine and the feces, or you have to maintain a cow shed and live with the cows as such. Satsada manobrajet gaha, that's what. Or another option is which is shilancha vrittihi. Shila uncha vritti is living on the grains picked up from the floor, from which have fallen off from the plants every day, and it has to be collected by yourself, and then you have to consume that. Brahmaratham uddareta. So shila uncha vritti is you are not supposed to eat anything which is stored and collected earlier. You have to pick up the grains which have fallen off from the plants every day, and then prepare the food that day itself, and you have to follow Brahmaratha. Brahmaratha is a Brahmana lifestyle where you have to continuously study, read, and then a modest lifestyle has to follow. Or The other way is Krisha. You have to cultivate the plants, work in the field, or dig a well, so on. So these are the rigorous exercises which could be suggested depending upon the social conditions and the facilities we have. अधनः वैद्यसन्देशाद् एवं कुर्वन् असन्दितः संवत्सरात् अन्तरात् वा प्रमेहः प्रयुज्यते. If you follow this lifestyle with a medical regulation or medical observation, continue this for a year or so, then all the pramehas will be cured. And this is a very important aspect of the management of the diabetes mellitus, the regulation of the diet and the regulation of the exercises. Now, but the WHO recommendations are exactly on the same line, but it looks more decent. Now, whatever we see from Sushruta, they may look irrelevant in the present day's lifestyle. WHO has recommended same: achieve and maintain healthy body weight, be physically active at least 30 minutes of regular moderate intensity activity on most days. More activity is required for weight control. Eat a healthy diet, avoiding sugar and saturated fat intake. Avoid tobacco use. These are the guidelines given by WHO to prevent the diabetes mellitus and its complications. Now, a bit more about this. Now, we have already referred to type 1 and type 2 diabetes mellitus. India is considered as the capital of diabetes mellitus, but the type of diabetes mellitus in India is not the type 1 which is in high numbers. Number of type 1 diabetes which is totally insulin dependent is not very high in India, it's just moderate. Whereas the Western countries, the incidence of type 1 diabetes is more. In the developed countries, it's more. In India, type 1 is lesser. But when it comes to the question of type 2, India is now the capital of type 2 diabetes mellitus, where the number is the maximum. So, rather throughout the world, if you consider the density of type 2 diabetes mellitus, India is in the top category. May not be number 1, but in the top category, whereas in Western countries it's lesser. So this is the very interesting issue which we need to highlight as such. Now, the reasons are, one of the most important reason is the reduced physical activity, insufficient physical activity, and this is what the worldwide trends in insufficient physical activity from 2001 to 2016, which is collected, and India comes in that category where the physical activity deficiency is quite high, though still there are some countries where the physical activity may be much lesser than that. But it's very interesting, like the India, where we have a traditional lifestyle, where Ayurvedic textbooks 5000 years ago have highlighted the value of the regular exercises in various conditions. It's not only in the prameha, in the various other conditions. And the agriculture is supposed to be the main mode of living. In the recent days, the physical activity has become lesser, and the reasons are many. That's the blind following of the Western lifestyle and feeling more convenient in traveling in a vehicle, but preferring to go on a trekking once a year or so. So regular exercise and regular physical activity being absent is the most important cause for this development of the type 2 diabetes mellitus in India, or India being the capital of type 2 diabetes. Not only type 2 diabetes, many other diseases, many other preventable diseases. It's mainly due to the reduced physical activity, and it could be like the reasons could be the increased financial status of the citizens, maybe, or vehicles and so on. The causes is not the important issue. And the number of diabetes induced deaths in India, this is again quite high from the WHO country profiles from 2016 data. Of course, the latest data, I couldn't get the graph of the latest data. The latest data would be still higher, but diabetes, number of diabetes related deaths, or number of deaths attributed to high blood sugar levels, is quite high in India, and diabetes can result in many other complications like cardiovascular disorders, or it could be communicable, preventable diseases like infectious conditions, the two major important causes which can be easily prevented by regulation of the diabetes mellitus. These are the important two causes and they have to be managed as such. That's the real burden of the health in India. And it's not only in India. People of Indian origin also have a higher tendency for the diabetes mellitus. In people who are living in United States, those who have come from Indian subcontinent, they also have a comparatively higher incidence of diabetes mellitus, particularly Indians who are obese, they have a high chance of diabetes mellitus, though they may be green card holders in USA. That's another interesting issue. So these are the facts which we need to consider. And it's again underweight and higher weight in USA and India and China, of course, a comparative studies of underweight and overweight population. Now, Indian subcontinent doesn't have really a massive underweight, these overweight conditions. The overweight patients are population is not of overweight. The weight of Indians are lesser. See, that's a very interesting issue. Diabetes incidence is more in Indians. Those who have gone from India and have the Indian genes also have a diabetes mellitus in higher less incidence. And often the diabetes is related to obesity and heavy weight. But if you compare the average body weight of the Indians and the USA and China comparatively, the lower weight category, people of lower weight category are more in India compared to the other countries, whereas people of high weight category, heavy weight category are more in the advanced developed countries like USA than India. But type 2 diabetes is more in India than the USA. So this is the paradoxical situation. What could be the cause? Now there was a theory about this. Because of these causes, a theory was developed like considering that Indians have a thrifty genes, and that the hypothesis of the thrifty gene is based upon a notion that India is a country of famines, and for generations the people didn't have sufficient food. Now because their lifestyle has changed and they have more food, they have their genes now they capture the food more and hence they are diabetic. Now this is a totally false expression of that thrifty genes. Rather, so this kind of a notion has become popular in the Western country and it's promoted in the Western countries, and many of our Indian doctors also say that this kind of a theory is true. But unfortunately, people do not know about the history of India. India is a country where since past, in the olden days, in the Purana time, or maybe till maybe the British invasion and so on, it is a country of plenty, and this is the country where gold and other jewels were sold on the road as such, and the concept of consumption of the food and distribution of the food was practical. But the only difference is there was no culture of accumulation. Sangraha buddhi is considered as one of the sins, whereas now the people have gone to the changes into that sangraha buddhi, collection and storing for unnecessary. So that history being cause for the genes is a totally false notion, but rather the genes which are responsible in India, they are of different categories. Now, for this, of course, now all these are, though it looks like unnecessary issues, but I think everyone of us have to know about this and how the false propaganda is working. The false propaganda is saying that Indians have a famine genes and because of the famine genes they are more diabetic. But it's not true. The basic issue is the body built, the phenotype of Indian origin and phenotype of European origin is different. When the patients who have the specific genes, the Indian genes, the fat mass is in the central area and more compared to the lean mass. The body's mass of the fat and the core hard structures is the ratio. In the Western, it's more. See, in the Western, maybe it looks more hefty and you will have more stronger built of the body. The body weight also will be more, and the body would be stronger. Whereas the Indian body would be having a leaner structure, but having more of the soft tissue, fat tissue will be more. So when we consider a healthy baby of Indian origin, it would be looking like this. Whereas a healthy baby of European origin would be looking like this. So the fat mass is different. That's because of the phenotype presentation of the genes, the specific genes, which they have named as feminine genes, but it's not really feminine genes, but this has a tendency to accumulate the fat. And as a result of that, whenever there is a accumulation of the fat, there is a tendency to have more and more accumulation of fat when there is a consumption of food. See, the impact of the food consumption would be producing more changes of the fat in Indian body structure compared to the West, and hence they are prone for the diabetes. So this theory of feminine genes has to be put in proper way, and that proper way is the genes have a tendency to accumulate fat, convert it into fat, and the lean body mass of the Indian origin is lesser, and hence Indians, they have to live in a style which was presented in our ancestral style, where the food has to be consumed in limits, and whatever you have to share it with others than really accumulate and never overeat. That's the issue. Now, as far as the accumulation of the fat is concerned, again, there are the types of 6 types of obesity which are mentioned, which are identified, and the obesity caused by the food, the number 1, that's where the belly as well as the chest area has become bulky, and this is what exactly you see in India. Majority of the obesity patients of India are of this number 1 category, or they are of the number 5 category, where there is maybe circulatory abnormalities. Whereas the other types of the categories of obesity are more common in Western countries. And of course, in India, another type of the category is obesity 6, where only the abdomen is increased. So, obesity due to inactivity and obesity to excess of food. These are the 2 types of the obesity which we see in India, and they are responsible for the causes as such. Now, as the WHO has been concerned about the physical activity, and there was a lot of promoting activity of the physical activity, every country has given instructions about that, and in India the physical activity has become a policy, and there was a national policy about physical activity and a follow-up of these physical activity census as such. And particularly from 2014 onwards, that Fit India is considered as a movement, and there was given a lot of publicity. But how much it has affected, that's the issue. 2018 physical activity card, the prevalence of physical activity in ages, it was 89% in adult ages like are females, males, and 84% in males of adult age. And the typical policy were like it was in 22nd position in the ranking of physical inactivity in the global situation. So that was the initial stage in 2018, and the Indian government has given a very detailed policy, and I would suggest all of you to go into this Fit India website. I have shown this screenshot of that Fit India website. The URL is fitindia.gov.in, and it has given the details about the fitness protocols and guidelines for different age groups like 5 to 18 years, 18 to 60 years, and so on. Lot of publicity is given, and still the results are, the 2022 result shows a totally different picture. The physical activity in the prevalence in males, adult males, has reduced to 56%, whereas and it is females, it is still reduced to 75%. This is the unfortunate issue. See, in 2018, 84 and 89%, 2022 it has reduced to 75% and 56%, and this is one of the issue which we need to highlight, and maybe promoting the issue is necessary. Though a lot of resources are spent on that, and the worldwide death due to the reduced physical activity, percentage of death due to reduced physical activity The worldwide is 9%, and in India now it's 8.7%. Whereas in 2018 it was just 4.2% in India. Worldwide it was 9% there too. So this is a very unfortunate event. Though a lot of publicity is given, still people are not following the instructions properly. And as a medical personnel, we need to promote this regular physical activity, either promote it to the patients or at least for ourselves. We need to have implement this in our lifestyle, and hence we need to have a fit India movement as such, so that it's not only the diabetes, obesity, thyroid disorders, hypertension, and cardiovascular disorders can be definitely prevented, and there can be lot of resources. If you have to have more detail about these physical activity and issues, WHO has given a global status of report on physical activity 2022, which is available on the net. It has a very extensive details of the physical activity in different countries under the WHO asset. And if the India becomes fully active, it is not only about the health, it can result in a huge development of the resources, and the total turnover of the Indian budget can be enhanced up to the 50 billion as such. So that's it's not only of health importance from the point of view of health, it's also important from the national building point of view. Anyway, that's about one part. Physical activity is one of the important issue, and in this context, all that whatever is mentioned in Sushruta like Shiva Unsha Vritti or Grama Ekavasi as such, all of them become very relevant. Then the other part is about the calorie restriction. So, of course, as the issue is calorie restriction and physical activity together, it can definitely improve the insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial functions, and type 2 diabetes can be definitely prevented. Type 1 diabetes, of course, cannot be totally cured or prevented, but burden of type 2 diabetes definitely can be prevented if you take care of that. Now, about the calorie restriction, again, there is a lot of confusion, a lot of details. Like best of the calorie restriction this guideline is what Ashangra has mentioned, like Guru Nam Artha Sahutyam, Laghu Nam Natitra, Matra Pramanam Nirdistam Sukham Vyavavyujiriyati. If it is a Guru Ahara, it should be like taken only half of the satisfaction. If it is a Laghu Ahara, should not overeat. And if this is mentioned, and you have to decide about your capacity to digest and take that food which you can digest and which you can utilize. There should be no over storage of the food. This is the best of the advice. Instead of going into all that complicated advices about the diet and restriction. Now, when it comes to the question of diabetes management now practically, of course, lots of confusions are there in the society, and lots of questions are there, and deal with all questions is not possible. But some of the frequent questions which are asked by the people are like, there is a notion that wheat is better than rice for the diabetes. Now, which we look at from Ayurvedic point of view, the wheat, the property of wheat and rice is considered from Charaka, the Shita Rase Vipaketa Madhura Alpamardaha, Baddha Alpavartaha, Stigdaha, Brahmanaha, Shukramutralaha, Raktashali Varahatesham, Dasnagnaha, Timalamat. Raktashali is considered Tidoshahara, and it's Mathura Rasa, and it reduces the total quantity of the residue food as such, the fecal material lesser. Whereas Godhuma, wheat is Swadashitala, Jivanaha, Brahmana, Vrishyaha, Snigdha, Sthaidakaraha, it is having more stronger asset. Now, if you look at the reference from the other point of view, the calorie value of the wheat is about 7 times more than the rice. The ratio of the calorie value of rice to wheat is 1:7. And the nutritional value, there are two aspects, calorie value and nutritional value. Nutritional value of the wheat is slightly more. It has more minerals and more of the calcium asset, whereas the minerals quantity and the other electrolyte quantity is lesser in rice, but not very significant. Protein content of the rice is lesser than that of the wheat, and the green suggests about the wheat, and the rice is the red color. Carbohydrates, of course, also is more, and fat is lesser in case of the wheat as such. Now, which is preferable? Now, from if at all there are now, if you go into that typical diet patterns which are used now, there are lots of types of the diets. Like again, I will not go into the details, which are quite popular and rather have become a fancy, and they are low calorie diet, low fat diet, low carb diet, low glycemic index diet, etc. The glycemic index of wheat is slightly lesser than that of the glucose rice. Otherwise, as far as the issue of calorie consumption, issue of fat consumption, which you have carbohydrate consumption, definitely rice is better than the wheat. The only advantage is the glycemic index. Glycemic index is when you consume a food, the amount of or the time taken for the food to get digested and the time taken for the glucose level to be increased is the glycemic index. If it is higher, that means more sugar is released and the level of glucose is increased as such. But practically, this glycemic index has a very minor role in the management of diabetes. Though I don't say it has no role, it has a very minor role. And from my point of view, this doesn't make any significant difference. If the patient is accustomed to rice, it could be consumed, or if it is wheat, which is the net food asset, because the glycemic index of wheat and rice is not very significantly high. The glycemic index of different types of wheat, white rice, parboiled rice, of course, brown rice or it is and boiled brown rice has relatively low glycemic index, and this glycemic index is much lesser than the wheat, like a puffed wheat or shredded wheat. Puffed or shredded wheat is having glycemic index more than that. White rice, of course, has a slightly higher glycemic index as such. And the total glucose load also is slightly higher with the rice, but this doesn't make difference if you follow the guidelines of Vagabhat. Various millets, now these days, this has become a fashion. Millets has become a fashion. And the glycemic index of different millets also are tried. Now, glycemic index of ragi or glycemic index of the amaranth are higher than that of the rice. Only the others have a lesser glycemic index. So millets as a whole, though they are publicized as having lower glycemic index and they are always now become a fashion, these also have a very limited role. Of course, they have some advantages. I am not denying those, and hence, if at all it is suitable, you may consume. Otherwise, none of these kinds of restrictions about the food material is not necessary. It can be any type of the food. The most important thing is you have to follow the guidelines of what Vagabhat has stated about Guru Nam Ardha Sotyam Raghunam Nati Trupti. Then the other question is jaggery or sugar. Of course, there is absolutely no difference as such, but according to our Samhitas, Purana Buddha is better than the jaggery, and any of those varieties of the sugar products which have become more and more clean, like which look like cleaner, like sugar, it would have more of Sneha Gaurav Shatyani. Yatha Yatesham Vaimalyam Madhuratvam Tata Tata Sneha Gaurav Shatyani Saratvam Tata. The Gaurav and Shita Guna and Sneha Guna would be higher if it is purified. So sugar would have a more Gaurav Guna and Shita Guna, which may not be suitable as such. So that's about the diet and as such. Then comes the practical question of dealing with the diabetes mellitus patients. Now, if I have to give you a scope or how I strategize the patients are coming to my clinic and how I deal with the diabetes patients would be, now this is purely my personal clinical experience suggested. I categorize the patients, or if I look at the patients who come to me in my clinic as such, patients who are fresh diagnosed with the patient who have come with other complaints, but I have fresh diagnosis, where the patient were not diagnosed. It comes to, now when I have mentioned about this percentage, it may not be very accurate, but very close to that. 5% of the patients are of that category. 5% of the patients recently diagnosed elsewhere, but they have not taken treatment and they prefer to have an Ayurvedic management, and that constitutes around 5%. Patients who are on medical management, already they have taken some medical management and they have a good satisfactory Ayurvedic glycemic control, but they prefer to have an Ayurvedic management either as an alternative or supplement. That constitutes around 5% of the patients. Patients who have a modern medicine treatment but their glycemic control is not proper and they have to seek an Ayurvedic management, such people that comes to around 10%. More number of patients come in that category. Patients who have a stabilized control, diabetic control with modern medicine, but they have some other accompanying disorders like osteoarthritis and so on, many other diseases, and they come for Ayurvedic treatment in that category, and they are a good number of patients, 25% of the patients. Patients with the unstable diabetes is not controlled, but they have the other diseases and they have come for the management of other, any of that. It need not be only osteoarthritis, hypertension, it could be any of those. That constitutes another group. So, major groups of the patients whom I deal with would be either patients who are on modern medical treatment for diabetes, either it's under control or not under control, but they come for some other complaint as such which is not related to the diabetes as such. Now, your strategy of treating these patients would be has to be customized, otherwise you will have a problem. Patients who come for diabetic complications like neuropathy, nephropathy, etc. Though they are on modern medicine treatment, they may have developed and they may prefer an Ayurvedic treatment and they may come to me. That's around 10%. Patients with the acute complications like gangrenes and ulcers, that's around 10%. Acute complications like ketoacidosis is around 2%. Patients who are absolutely insulin dependent diabetes and they prefer to have a Ayurvedic replacement or supplement, it's around 3%. The ketoacidosis like acute conditions are very less compared to the spectrum of patients whom I see in my clinical practice. Of course, when I say these percentages as such, it could be different for different physicians or the different perception of the society about the capacity of that particular physician. Now, I have given my example as such. So, now whatever I am saying now, this need not be a uniform standard for all, but this gives a model of how to deal with the patients when you go into the practice as such. Now, my approach to the management would be the patients who have been diagnosed with for other complaints, again, either based upon the diagnosis of either unconventional or conventional stigma. Now, unconventional stigma of diabetes patients are like numbness, balanitis or vaginitis, infection in the genital area, brachial neuralgia, frozen shoulder, kinesis, sleep disorders, sexual incompetence. When these patients come, essentially sugar level is identified and then the sugar level is tested, and if it is being confirmed, the patient needs to be treated. And in such conditions where the patients have not taken any treatment and diagnosed by me only, I will be treating such patients initially observation for 1 month with the diet and exercise only when they do not have any these typical stigma and they are diagnosed otherwise, casually diagnosed, like many of the patients just casually get the blood sugar level and it's higher. In such conditions, it could be like, and in such patients, Virechana is a game changer if Sansari and prameha is followed properly, where the patients are diagnosed without any typical stigma of diabetes, but they have just increased sugar level. Many of the patients can be kept on observation for a month or so with the diet and exercise, and many of them can be now just ruled out that they are not diabetes and there is no need of treatment. Or if at all, Virechana in such given patients who can give a significant change in the outlook and it's a game changer. Many of the patients can be cured, but the total outcome is unpredictable. If the patient has a established diabetes and these stigma are there, then usually my preference of the treatment is Asanadi, Chandraprabha, Arogyavardhini, and maybe depending upon the other symptoms, if the patient has neuritis or underweight, Ashwagandha is like balanitis, Gandhaka Rasayana, tinnitus is LS40 Gandhaka Rasayana, neuralgia, Ekankvira and Vishnu or Vishnu stress as the Saraswati. These are the other prescriptions which I generally prescribe in the patient of diabetes. Then the other type of the patients who are recently diagnosed and they tend to prefer for Ayurvedic management. Now, the protocol is I would always screen for these complications like neuritis, vascular or albuminuria, and then decide like whether the patient can be treated with our treatment alone or whether they need the other modern medicine treatment also. And what I have observed is such patients usually have what we call as a soda bottle psychology. They prefer Ayurvedic treatment for months, and then after a few months or so, they may discontinue. Such non-compliance and dropouts are quite high with this category of patients. And my preference is if the patient has no other complications and the sugar level is between 200 milligram or HbA1c is less than 7.5, diet and exercise, 1 month follow-up, and Virecana with somewhat inconsistent advantages. A patient may have advantage. If the patient has a persistent hypoglycemia, then if the patient is within that IGT category, the lower category as such, I may not give asana even Chandraprabha Arogya Avipatgar with Godancha and Virechana, Anulomana is treatment. If the patient has a potential risk of diabetes complications, then Asanati Chandraprabha Arogya is given. Or if the patient doesn't respond to the simple Arogya and Avipatika Churna, then I may prefer Asanati Pata in such patients as such. So that's in those patients who are recently diagnosed and they have not been treated with the modern medicine and they come for Ayurvedic treatment. Then patients who are already on other contemporary management and their diabetes is under satisfactory control, but they prefer to have an Ayurvedic treatment. There is again the patient is, I do not suggest the patient to shift over immediately because the changeover has to be gradual and it should be like there should not be any spikes as such. And my usual prescription would be Asanati Arogya Chandraprabha and Diabetic. Withdrawal of the existing regimen, whatever the protocol of the treatment, like it could be metformin or pioglitazone and so on, will be very complex and when particularly multiple drugs are prescribed. So it has to be very careful and you have to know the pharmacology of every drug there, and I think I may not be able to explain all that in this session. So that's a very complex issue, but you have to be very careful. Then for the strategies of withdrawal of oral hypoglycemics, general issue would be like if the patient has the adverse effects of those drugs, like sulfonidurias, the adverse effects are GIT symptoms, or if the patient is on meglitides like rapaglitazine or netaglitazine, the usual would be hepatic and renal symptoms. Bicarbonate is weight gain, and thiazolidines is cardiac symptoms and edema. And patients with the glucosidase inhibitors, which are obligos, like it's a hepatic involvement is the adverse effect, and DPP-4 sitagliptin, sexagliptin, etc. is a GAT involvement, and SGLT inhibitors it's a renal involvement, and cyclosate is rarely prescribed in our conditions. Neurological, this is not prescribed regularly in India, but these are commonly prescribed, and these drugs could be withdrawn based upon the possibility of the adverse effects in that patient by choice. So when I say withdrawal of these drugs, that's based upon that. So that's a very complex issue. In brief, all that I can say is that much. Then if the patient is on unsatisfactory glycemic control but prefer an Ayurvedic management supplement, the target is to prevent or postpone the complication. And Ayurvedic drugs, same Asanati Chandraprabha, but they can be effectively, safely co-prescribed. There is no harm in co-prescribing those drugs. And modification or withdrawal of the prescription is a very delicate issue, and dropout rates are quite high in such category. Then the category is 5 to 6, which I have told earlier, stable or unstable glycemic control with the other accompanying disorders. That is, any of our Ayurvedic drug can be easily prescribed without modifying those anti-diabetic drugs in a stable patient. In a patient who is stable otherwise, as far as the diabetes is concerned, I would not modify those. Whatever the condition requires, the same prescription is given. And I would always avoid meddling with the existing anti-diabetic treatment, because ultimately it's the welfare of the patient which is required. Then the other notions which the people would have, like asavar, sugar containing churnas, can be prescribed without any disadvantage. I do prescribe regularly asavars or other sugar containing churnas in a patient of diabetes if there is a requirement otherwise. And duration of the treatment as in expected results differ from otherwise healthy patient like osteoarthritis without diabetes and osteoarthritis with diabetes. The duration of the treatment could be more. Result expected could be slightly poorer than otherwise healthy patient. This has to be advised to the patient. With this, let me conclude and इति शुश्रूषामितां चिकित्सास्थाने प्रमेह चिकित्सा नाम एकादशोऽध्यायः. If there are any questions, I will try to answer those. And then there is one question for old patients who, what are the treatment of you follow? So is irrespective of the age, I categorize the patients based upon these issues. The important is to ensure that the patient is not put to loss because he has come for Ayurvedic treatment. With this, I started this way. My prescriptions and my strategy in clinical approach is based upon whatever I have categorized as such. There is no difference between the age as such, right? Okay. Right.